Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this session on immigrant workforce integration, including upskilling and reskilling for employment and entrepreneurship. I'm Caitlin Svecko, Director of Research Special Projects here at the Diversity Institute at Toronto Metropolitan University, and I'll be the chair for this presentation. Today I have with me Dr. Wendy Sukier, Professor of Entrepreneurship and Innovation at the Ted Rogers School of Management at Toronto Metropolitan University, and founder and academic director of the Diversity Institute. I also have with me Dr. Tony Fang, Professor and Jaroslawski Chair at Memorial University, and Daniel Servin-Gill, who is Associate Director of Employer Initiatives at World Education Services. This workshop examines how Canada can better leverage immigrant talent through workforce integration, upskilling, and pathways to entrepreneurship. Drawing on national research, it identifies systemic barriers that limit newcomer participation and highlight policy and program solutions that support equitable employment outcomes. There will be 3 presentations by our speakers today and a designated time for Q&A at the end, which will be accepted through the chat function. At this point, I'd like to welcome our first speaker, Dr. Wendy Sukier. In addition to Wendy's role at the Diversity Institute and as professors of entrepreneurship and innovation at the Ted Rogers School of Management at TMU, Wendy is also academic director for the Future Skills Center, where she oversees a comprehensive research agenda focused on creating pathways to newcomers to education, employment, and leadership, as well as innovative pilot projects. At this point, I'd like to hand it over to you, Wendy.
Thanks so much, Caitlin, and thanks very much, Tony and Daniel, for joining us. And thanks to the organizers, of course, for giving us this opportunity. I'm going to talk fairly quickly because I want to make sure we have lots of time for discussion. But what I really wanted to do is provide a bit of an overview of some of the research we're doing through the Future Skills Center and as part of the Bridging Divides Canada Excellence Research Chair project that we're involved in. The first, a little bit about the Diversity Institute, then a little bit about the context. I know that there are lots of experts in the audience, so I don't have to say much. Talk a bit about some of the innovative programs supporting newcomers, but I really want to drill down into some of the issues around immigrant entrepreneurs and what we think the implications are. The most important thing about the Diversity Institute is that we are in the business school, so our focus is very much on how equity, diversity, and inclusion help drive organizational performance. The other important point is we have 10 sites across the country, and in fact, today I'm joining you from beautiful Winnipeg, where our partner is the University of Manitoba. So lots of research that has been done on immigrant experiences with employment. And we know this story, it hasn't changed in a long time. One of the things that surprises a lot of people, given all the focus on, for example, English language training, is the research shows that skills are not always a predictor for employment. So even competency in English is associated with long-term earnings, but not short-term employment. We know there's a lack of credential recognition. Daniel will talk more about this. We know that there's bias baked into the design of programs and processes. And Tony will talk about some of his research, which is fascinating. His previous study showed that employers who hire immigrants tend to hire more immigrants because of the association between attitudes and action. We also know that a lot of the supports are misaligned to labor markets. A lot of the organizations that are focused on helping immigrants get employment are not as connected to employers as they should be, and that there are issues around fragmentation and duplication. We know that there are issues around competency frameworks and outcome measurements, and there have been some pretty damning studies, for example, that look at the impact of some of our English language training programs. We also know that in the current context, and we had a session earlier this morning, there's huge uncertainty in terms of what's happening with employment, lots of disruption because of global geopolitical trends, technology, and so on. And we know that immigrants are not monolithic, that we have to have an intersectional lens, that racialized immigrants have different experiences than white immigrants, that immigrants who speak English as a second language have different experiences. Women have different experiences, and so on. And one of the things that is really important to note is that some of the barriers and issues around employment for immigrants um, are not getting a lot better. We know that Canada does not fare particularly well, and many of you have heard me cite the research that shows, for example, that in Australia, after 5 years in major professions like medicine, nursing, engineering, and so on, immigrants earn 90% of immigrants earn the same as people who were born in Australia. and Canada, it's only 50%. So we have things to talk about. We also have issues to deal with in terms of experiences in the workplace with respect to discrimination. This is a very large study we did with Environics, 8 waves, 40,000 respondents. What's interesting is recent immigrants experience and report more discrimination than others, racialized immigrants more than others, and recently South Asian immigrants in particular have been experiencing discrimination at record levels. And a lot of this is a result of the discourse around international students and the backlash we've seen. Attitudes to immigrants have shifted dramatically, and I would argue it's a topic for another discussion. This has been the result of deliberate misinformation, misrepresentation of data, and the spillover effects of, frankly, rhetoric in the United States, which legitimizes hate against and xenophobia. And we can talk more about that. But this creates a very different context for immigrants seeking employment than even we saw a few years ago. When you drill down into, and this is another study we did with Environics, even though some Canadians, majority now, believe there's too much immigration, a lot of this has been shaped by misinformation. And some of you know about the research that I did with Morley Gunderson that showed, for example, despite all this stuff about immigration driving housing prices, immigration levels only account for 10% of the change in housing prices. Yet the media really has a lot to be accountable for in terms of reinforcing misinformation. When you dig in a little bit more, we see that Canadians' views on immigration are a bit more complex, that there's certainly support for economic migrants, but there are lots of questions that are being raised about refugees and asylum seekers. And as I said, we've got lots of research that shows very deliberate efforts to sow dissent with misinformation. Contrast that to the attitudes of Canadians overall to equity, diversity, and inclusion. And again, we can dig into this in more detail, but some would think, based on the rhetoric, that there's huge backlash against EDI. And yet we see only 16% of respondents, 5,000. It's a big survey. Only 16% say EDI at work is a bad thing. 54% say it's a good thing. And so somehow the commitments around EDI, I would argue, because they cross different ethnic and demographic categories, has stayed solid, whereas attitudes to immigration and immigrants has really deteriorated. We also know that many immigrants feel that jobs are hard to get, particularly those who are here recently, and many are very concerned about what's going to happen as a result of automation. And you can see it's particularly acute with recent immigrants. At almost 60% are worried about their jobs. And I would argue potentially with good reason. What's also interesting, though, as we look at the impact, for example, of artificial intelligence, recent immigrants are more likely to be using AI in the workplace. Recent immigrants are more likely to be self-taught. Recent immigrants are more likely to think their workplaces are slow in terms of AI adoption. And recent immigrants are also concerned about keeping up with changes in technology. There are lots of programs that have been developed, and I won't go through these in in detail that have been developed and evaluated for their impact specifically on helping immigrants get jobs. And I think in the current environment, we have to be laser focused on outcomes, regardless of what sector we're in, whether we're a post-secondary institution, whether we're a community organization or a government agency. We have to be laser focused on outcomes and value for money. The ADAPT program, which Caitlin could talk more about, is one example of a program that was tailored to the needs of newcomers and has produced strong outcomes. And we compare the outcomes for newcomers, non-newcomers, and so on, and look at the results across different skills. And we see, for example, there aren't huge differences among newcomers and others, except in certain areas like communication skills, which is not surprising. One of the things that we would argue is critically important is to have employers at the center. And that is something that to me seems obvious, but having done a fairly comprehensive review of immigrant serving programs across the country, we see there is uneven evaluation and certainly inconsistent relationships with actual employers. We've also looked in some detail at career pathing processes and where we have to invest time and effort in helping newcomers build social capital, confidence, ensuring that they have their transportation costs and childcare costs covered so they can actually attend the training programs and so on. And it's really important from our perspective to recognize that the job search process, the training process, are basically social processes. And it's not just about sticking content into people's brains. It's about helping them develop and navigate the systems. The other thing that I really wanted to talk about before I wrap up is the importance, especially in this environment, on really centering entrepreneurial skills, not just for immigrants who want to be in business, and there are lots of those, but also as a set of skills that help people become resilient, adaptive, and able to navigate the current environment, which is characterized by change. We know that immigrant-owned businesses are critical to the Canadian economy. We know that immigrant-owned businesses are more likely to export. We know that immigrants are our competitive advantage when it comes to entering new markets. And, as our Prime Minister is running around trying to make friends with other countries, we know that immigrants who have relationships with those countries are really key to being successful. And we've done lots of research on these issues. We know that immigrant entrepreneurs often face barriers, different barriers than those seeking employment, but we have to work really hard to make sure that they have access to the supports that they need in order to navigate regulations, in order to overcome the bias they face in financial institutions because they don't have Canadian credit ratings or history. And we have to make sure that we're evaluating programs for outcomes and impact, not just bums in seats and whether people like them or not. And we've done a number of programs trying to figure out what works for whom. We need to really challenge the narrative. We need to focus on stories of success. We need to recognize that immigrants built Canada, starting with the railroads, including the houses, and in terms of businesses. And we need to think about the problems within the ecosystem, not just as a matter of fixing the job seekers, but also addressing issues in employers, making sure that they know where to find talent, that they remove barriers, making sure that service providers are laser focused on outcomes. And we're developing all sorts of competency frameworks to try to rationalize the navigation through the system. We believe that AI skills are now foundational skills, part of the Skills for Success framework, and that all Canadians need AI literacy. We're looking at entrepreneurship competency models and making sure we take into account stages of development, sectors, but also identities. Tools to help organizations be more inclusive, and thinking about how immigrants are an asset and bring assets to the table as opposed to being disadvantaged. So we're big on data, disaggregated data in particular. We're big on focusing on competencies and outcomes. We think that there's lots and lots that can be done to advance entrepreneurship and show that immigrants help build the economy. And we think that increasingly digital skills are part of the solution. So thank you very much for your attention. And I will pass it back to you, Caitlin.
Thank you, Wendy, for sharing the work and insights on immigrants, employment, and entrepreneurship, underscoring competencies and outcomes. And now I'd like to take this time to bring in our next speaker, Dr. Tony Fang, who holds the Stephen Jaroslawski Chair in Economic and Cultural Transformation at Memorial University and the J. Robert Baster Faculty Fellowship at Rutgers University. He has published widely in top journals, including Strategic Management Journal, Industrial Relations Review, Journal of World Business, and Canadian Journal of Economics. At this point, I'd like to hand it over to you, Tony.
Thank you, Kathleen, for chairing the session. Also, thank you, P2P and DI, Diversity Institute, for organizing the session, providing an opportunity to us speak on a very important issue, and also good in company with Wendy and Danielle, and fruitful discussion. I'm really looking forward to the panel discussion a little bit later on. So this is, I think, it's a very interesting time, also a challenging time, right? As you know, we have seen the federal budget. This is probably first time in a long time that includes actually immigration level plans, which showcase that the government really consider immigration as a very important part of the economic development strategy. And we also welcome that, these very important investment. So kind of intergenerational investment in mega project, but also in, high quality global talents, and $1.7 billion, I believe. And this is actually very critical time for us as well at the Memorial, because we celebrate the 100 years anniversary, and at the same time also celebrate 100 years of birthday for our major funder, Mr. Jaroslawski himself. Actually was a refugee from Germany in the 1940s, and eventually started his own business, and very successful, and become a billionaire actually in Canada, and is very passionate about the Canadian Confederation and also immigration system. So he actually donated to date more than 50 research chairs to major Canadian universities. I was very proud and honored to be one of the shareholders in the first few cohorts. And so I think his experience is a testimony in how, the immigrants in Canada can make, significant economic, social, and cultural contribution to this great country, very generous country. So I also want to take opportunity to thank my research team who have prepared all the materials and data and also analysis for this presentation. So I would like to echo what Wendy just suggested. Where Canada is a really good position to attract, integrate, and retain highly skilled immigrants, and also leveraging the advanced technologies. Such as artificial intelligence and so on, to help develop more inclusive hiring practices, and also diversity management. I think, to this front, Diversity Institute is not only a major research hub, but also is a pioneer to develop, right, more actionable diversity management practices and tools, for Canadian organizations, especially SMEs. So really, I want to applaud all these efforts and initiatives and made by the Diversity Institute. So again, to this end, also would like to thank, of course, DI and Future Skills Center, and also the ACOVA for the general support to our national survey on skill development and employment practices. Okay, and also when you also mentioned that, highlight some of the important research finding, which shows that majority of the Canadian SMEs actually reported positively hiring attitude towards immigrants and international students, 80-90%. This is before COVID and also after COVID, and across the nation, but also in particular Atlantic Canada, because we have experienced, particular demographic challenges and skill labor shortages. Okay, so in this survey, we not only asked about this hiring. Employee hiring practices, attitudes, but also adoption of AI and other advantage technology, and especially how they can leverage AI to provide valuable training to employees, especially newcomers, but also develop more inclusive hiring practices and integration programs. So this survey actually is national representative survey, and we conduct survey based on what is called stratified random sampling methods, according to three domains, which are the industry, region, and also the firm size. Okay, so you should have fair confidence on our results, and that are actually national representative of the SMEs. So first of all, the 30% of the Canadian SMEs actually adopted the AI, artificial intelligence, but there's a regional variation. You can see that the adoption rate is particularly high in Western Canada, 34.6%. But lower in Quebec. I'm not sure this attributable to some kind of culture issues, language issues, but only 19%. And we also notice this kind of stylized facts, and it is the large organization, okay, and also younger organization are more likely to adopt AI, okay, and AI are more likely to be used for organizational performance, such as productivity tools, marketing, advertising, sales forecasting, product design, and so on and so forth. Not surprising. And a little bit to our surprise, only 4% SME reported using AI for human resource management. And so maybe this is an area that we need to highlight. Maybe let's issue awareness. Maybe let's say, lack of capacity for HRM, meaning SME don't even have HR department, lack of these critical skills, and lack of the financial resources. Whatever the reason is, I think, this is the area shouldn't certainly merits a lot of attention. And so next question we ask is that how AI affect organizational performance. And he said the results are pretty actually robust, okay? And we can see that, the different area we're talking about, that it was highlighted productivity and marketing and sales, product design, and so on. And in HR areas, we talk about, again, AI mostly used for kind of traditional HR practice, such as advertising, resume screening, and so on, but not in terms of very, kind of advanced, sophisticated HR policy and practice like applicant tracking system, onboarding, and workforce forecasting, and so on. Again, this is probably also attributable to those kind of limitations. We talk capacity limitations. We mentioned a little bit earlier. Again, there are a lot of potentials as SME develop those kind of competences by leveraging artificial intelligence. And so next we're looking at ask a reason why the SMEs, those who have not adopted AI, and surprisingly, actually, 68.9% of them say they don't adopt because there's no need. Again, this point to critical wellness issues, capacity issue, lack of information, and lack of evidence on the AI impact on organization performance. and so on and so forth. And other reasons behind unusual, unsure how to integrate, difficult to use, right? Don't trust the data quality, and concerned about privacy, regulatory legal risk, and so on. So not so surprising, okay? And but do deserve a lot of attention as well. So in terms of how AI affect perception of business performance, this is actually results stand out. And it's not surprising as well. So the AI adoption certainly can improve those metrics like operational efficiency, not surprising, saving a lot of times, and especially for those processing high, large amount of data sets and models and so on. And actually, our job is at risk as economists, right? Because we are dealing with a lot of data crunching and organizing productivity, 47.6% reported, increase along with personal marketing sales, improving products and services, and so on. So yeah, the evidence is pretty convincing, but only among those who have adopted, right? I mean, the majority of the SME don't adopt, they're not aware of, right? This positive outcome. So this is maybe the job we need to do as researchers, not just writing paper in dark room, but also circulate, mobilize knowledge so that SMEs will be aware of and will actually utilize all that kind of the tools, the initiatives that DI have developed, right, and make a difference on the bottom line business. And relate to the adoption of AI, the critical question is that, would it be the future skills mostly in demand, right, for today's economy, maybe future economy? And one skill is particularly, on the spotlight, I would say, is digital skills. This is something is non-negotiable, right? For large organization, for small medium-sized enterprises, digital skills is a number one. Okay, 21.1% of SME reported. This is something that they'll definitely desire for the employees in the next 3 years. And the second and third are much distant, okay, from the first, which are kind of interesting, soft skills, right? Communication, adaptability, problem solving, and creativity, innovation. So this is actually consistent with the recent evidence suggests that, there is great demand, so-called hybrid skills, right? You do need those kind of, hard skills like digital skills, but also, same time, you need complementary soft skills, right, to make a great effects on employee performance and organizational performance, okay? And again, in terms of actual training of those kind of skills, different kind of skills, well, for national data, what it shows is that, they steer SMEs so prioritize on the compliance-based, right, compliance-based skill training, like industry certification, workplace health safety, and not very much into the kind of, right, hard skills, new technology we're talking about, and which is a little bit surprising. So I would add on a little bit of, on the immigration, the important role of the immigrant entrepreneurship. What do we have found? We'll show you in a minute, is that immigrant-owned organizations are much more agile, much more risk-taking, much more on the front line AI adoption, and have more superior organization performance as a result of AI adoption, right? This is something that is consistent with the message Wendy just mentioned that in her study, that a lot of immigrant newcomers fail, organizations very slow, adopting new technologies, not adaptable, a lot of agile, not flexible, and actually evidence suggests that the employees are actually ahead of game in terms of AI adoption than employers, right? It's kind of interesting finding. Also has very important policy and practice implications. And in terms of AI as a tool support immigrant integration outcomes. And again, this is the interesting that among those who answer this question, many don't answer, this question at all. And majority of them say that they don't know AI would have any impact on immigrant integration. This is something that, again, we need to do more work on, right? There's lack of awareness, and and lack of maybe capacity and support. Okay, and so among those who actually use AI for immigrant integration, and not surprisingly, many of them use for language training. 13.3, number one, job specific training, and cross-cultural communication. Again, I highlight immigrant-owned enterprise are more likely to provide those kind of support to immigrant integration. And also in all the dimensions, we're talking language training, job specific training, and so on, cross-cultural training as well. So this is a separation. I think it's the highlight of the research findings here. If you look at AI adoptions among immigrant-owned firms, right? Much high on for Atlantic Canada, 34.2%, rest of Canada, 35%. Look at that. For non-immigrant-owned firm, 23.5%, and 29%, much lower. Okay, and then we're looking at different functional areas where firms using AI. Okay, again, look at that. Immigrant-owned firm have much higher percentage of using for those purposes, productivity tools, marketing, so on. And look at this, right? For non-immigrant-owned companies, much lower percentage, right? Using those critical business function areas. And look at the AI use impact on business performance. Again, looking at that, immigrant-owned firms, much superior performance because AI adoption, operational efficiency, personal marketing, improved product and service. Look at this, much lower. Okay, 73% versus 59.7% for non-immigrant-owned firms. Okay, and so there's always a question, billion-dollar question, maybe say, why immigrants are more likely to adopt AI, more likely to use those key function area, more likely to exit, superior performance because AI adopt, because maybe I think immigrants are more risk-taking, right? Immigrants are more likely to be self-motivated, they are more entrepreneur, and they're more agile, they are more adaptable, right? So those kind of, evidence is well documented literature, and they also apply to the AI research we have done here, okay? And look at desirable employee skills, right? We talk about, national average, but 21% of immigrant-owned companies, 31.6%, much higher than the other non-immigrant-owned company. Communication, 9.5%. And again, across the board, much higher, right? So immigrants are more proactive in providing those kind of cutting-edge skills and knowledge to their future employees. They believe it's more desirable. Okay, and then non-immigrant owned companies, and type of skills. Again, look at the immigrant owned. They focus on hard skill, communication, new technology, but much higher than the non-immigrant owned. They focus more on compliance based. In the certification, work health safety. This is kind of different patterns. Okay, the kind of focus on the training that mostly useful, right, to improve organization performance rather than the compliances. Okay, and then looking at AI being used as a tool for immigrant integration retention, and for immigrant-owned firms, much less. Okay, percentage they said no way, no use. And they're more likely to put into language training, job security training, cross communication training, compared with non-immigrant-owned firms. Okay, so I think I'm sorry for all this data. I probably am running out of time. I'm not sure. Catalina, can you give me a little bit a sign, say how much time I have? Maybe I have zero time now, but I'm looking forward again to the panel discussion and the Q&A a little bit later on.
Thank you, Tony. No, that's perfect. So thank you for sharing your insights on the determinants of AI adoption and its effects on immigrant skill requirements and organizational performance. At this point, I just want to give a little reminder to everyone that questions for the Q&A will be accepted through the chat function in the FeedLoop platform and will be addressed during the designated Q&A at the end of the session. Now I'd like to welcome Daniel Servin-Gill, who is the Associate Director of Employer Initiatives at WES. In his role, Daniel leads WES's work with employers, employer-facing organizations, municipal and regional actors to create and socialize solutions, strategies, and new tools related to the recruitment, retention, and reskilling of immigrants. At this point, I'd like to hand it over to you, Daniel.
Thank you, Caitlin. Thank you for having me, and it's a pleasure to also share panel with Tony and Wendy. For my presentation today, I'd like to focus on three sections. On the first few slides, I'll provide you with some context on where we are today and what got us to this moment. I'll then like to speak to some of the ongoing barriers and some of the emerging solutions that we're seeing. And also, I'll close with some high-level calls to action to ensure we're setting newcomers and the Canadian economy up for success. Next slide, please. First of all, I wanted to provide a very brief introduction review of WES's work. As many of you may know, World Education Services is a non-for-profit social enterprise that's dedicated to the success of immigrants, refugees, and international students. We work at the intersection of education, workforce development, philanthropy, policy advocacy, and research. This is our 50th anniversary in Canada this year. And in our work, even though many of you may know us through our educational credential evaluation, we use a mix of levers to help build inclusive economies. So we do this with an array of incredible partners from across the country, many of whom are probably in the virtual room today. Next slide. Just very quickly, our vision is that everyone is able to put their education, experience, and skills to work anywhere in the world. And our mission is to help people learn, work, and thrive in new places, helping societies recognize the value of people's education and experience. Now, in this slide, you see here, wanted to set the stage with a reminder of some of the key demographic data. Canada's population is about 41.7 million as per Statistics Canada's real-time population clock. Immigrants make up approximately 23% of Canada's population. This is based on 2021's Canada census. An important piece of information that we like to repeat and to set the stage is that immigration accounts for almost 100% of labor force growth. This is forecasted to be net 100% by 2030. Also, immigration is projected to drive 100% of population growth by 2032, while our society continues to age. I think this is important as we talk specifically around some of the why we're looking into integration, removing barriers to integration, and as ways to foster economic productivity. On the next slide, please, we'll look also more generally at labor market dynamics. Excuse me, demographics, more broadly, and immigration in particular, are major factors that are shaping Canada's labor market. But not only. The market is also being shaped by other factors. Some of it have been already addressed by my colleagues: technology and automation, in particular, the AI revolution. We see many opportunities for workers, as Tony has very eloquently and in detail shared with us. But there are also some risks and threats, particularly acute for newcomers. I'll go into those in a minute. But for example, the erosion of entry-level learning opportunities due to AI is creating a crisis of work exposure. You have seen how unemployment rates for youth are disproportionately higher than the average for the country. Some of it may actually have to do with this lack of entry-level positions being created. New hires also are expected to perform from day one, but not all have access to the same pathways to gain that experience. And that's particularly true to many newcomers in the country. We are also facing economic stability. I don't have to go in details about the tariffs, the layoffs, the inflation, and how all of this also affects disproportionately immigrants and refugees. We see, for example, that youth unemployment is nearing, among immigrants, 24%. We also are familiar with the saying that last in, first out. So as we go into potentially layoffs and shrinking of the economy, this is something to watch out for as well. Now, amidst a shifting labor market, we also have an economy and a country that is in transition. We see many Canadians are also struggling. These economic pressures affect everybody across the board, but especially in some regions, we're seeing that the unemployment rate is spiking. Across the country, the average is 7%, which is a 4% high. This is up from 6.5 in September 2024. Um, we've also seen that immigrant unemployment rate is higher, even at 12.6%. Um, all of these comes influenced by US-Canada trade tensions, but also loss of consumer confidence, shrinking GDP, causing economic uncertainty, and the risk of a recession. Another important trend I think that is worth mentioning is the temporary residence level. Now, coming out of the pandemic in 2020 and 2021, Canada began inviting more permanent residents to help with severe labor shortages. You may all remember when the restaurants were not able to open like full time because they were not enough servers. This included temporary foreign workers, but also students who helped fill some of the labor gaps and boosted university funding. In 2019, Canada's temporary resident population was about 1.25 to 1.5% of the population. Now, by 2023, that number was 6.2% of the population, over 2 million temporary residents living in Canada. The government has announced its intention to reduce that number down to 5% by the end of 2027. So all of these combined, Wendy went into these, the economic pressures coupled with ballooning immigration levels have contributed to a significant decline in public support for high immigration levels. In fall 2024, public opinion polls revealed that for the first time in a quarter of a century, a clear majority of Canadians believe that there is too much immigration, and that sentiment has been growing. We saw at the conference yesterday that it seems to be stabilizing, but still there is a huge gap compared to where we were a couple of years ago. Now, polls held this fall still show that about 56% of Canadians believe that the country accepts too many immigrants. This takes us to the next slide when we just very briefly, and then I will go on to a little bit of the analysis, talking about Canada's immigration targets. Many of you are, I'm sure, are watching for these numbers. The government has been seeking to respond to these pressures and shifting sentiment regarding immigration. Earlier this month, they released the 2026-2028 levels plan. IRCC is aiming for sustainable levels of immigration by stabilizing permanent resident admissions for the next 3 years and decreasing the temporary resident population to 5%, as I mentioned earlier, of the total population by the end of 2027. The plan also includes a one-time 2-year initiative to accelerate the transition of up to 33,000 additional work permit holders to permanent residency. And finally, the plan also indicates that both temporary resident and permanent resident targets will prioritize those who fill specific labor market needs. Next slide, please. So there's been a lot of discussion about the levels plan. What are the implications in the settlement sector? This is something that is watched really closely because it also affects the funding levels for many of your organizations. And these are all very important conversations. But I would argue that focusing on levels and mix alone misses the point. While we debate the numbers, we fail to leverage the skills and talents of millions of newcomers who are already here in Canada. As we know, there are some persistent barriers at place. The first one that I will mention is recognition. 60% of newcomers hold a bachelor's degree, and yet 40% of internationally trained immigrants are unemployed in jobs that do not require their skills and education. The biggest gap is recognition, not of education alone, but of lived experience, competencies, and transferable skills. Many tools still fail to capture that. And as we move into the HR, the use of AI by HR professionals and companies, we risk that running an algorithm on our resume may not be telling us the depth and breadth of experience and expertise. I won't go into detail this, but I'll be happy to also, and during the Q&A, elaborate a little bit more about some of the approaches that some employers are using to try to build this gap. The second thing that I would mention is that many tools are being developed to assess skills. This is something that also Wes is looking into. We've managed to crack and I think solve the issue, not only Wes, but through the Credential Evaluation Alliance in Canada of educational credential evaluations to a large degree for educational purposes. Wes report or any equivalent report is accepted by universities across the country, also largely accepted for licensure and employment purposes. However, skills are still not being recognized, and the experience that internationally trained individuals are bringing to the country are not being recognized to the degree that employers are using explicitly or implicitly Canadian experience as a proxy for skills. And so we need to really look into developing skills frameworks that can be nationwide, used across the country, and that can support employers in decision-making processes. Exclusion from mainstream startup ecosystems. This is another issue. Wendy touched on it, so I won't go into detail. I'll just say that studies reveal that immigrant-owned firms contribute 25% of net job creation, despite representing only 17% of all firms. And yet immigrants face exclusion from the mainstream startup ecosystem. So this is another issue around access to capital, mentorship, and social networks. Now, in the next slide, I'd like to share some good news, and is that solutions exist, and we're starting to see best practices, promising practices every day. I'll just share a couple of them. The first one is micro internships. We've seen great success with short-term paid micro internships and project-based placements that are embedded in community-based programs, because these offer low risk, high trust entry points for employers. This can also help overcome the shrinking entry-level learning opportunities that I mentioned earlier. Some of the also initiatives that we're seeing is using technology, particularly the creation of simulated scenarios. In the skills trade sector, for example, there are programs in the healthcare sector as well that are experimenting by using virtual reality to assess and upskill tradespersons by placing them in simulated scenarios. So very promising pilots that are showing also a way forward there. In the next slide, I also wanted to maybe highlight the power of partnership. I think it comes to no surprise to anybody that 1 + 1 often is more than 2. And so when we talk about these systems level issues, it is really important that we don't do this alone. One of the key things that at West we have embedded in all of our programs is co-design. We truly believe that programs must reflect local realities, and that often means working together from the beginning, not just as handoffs or coming into a process. So an example is an initiative that we call #ImmigrantWork. This is a community mobilization and employer mobilization initiative that brings together employers, business associations, workforce development stakeholders to co-design tools that lead to the better outcomes in terms of tapping and retaining immigrant talent, particularly in smaller communities. We're coming from wrapping up the phase 2 of the initiative. Some of the communities involved include the Lanark and Renfrew County and the Grey and Bruce counties in Ontario, but also communities in Saskatoon, BC, and also in the Atlantic provinces. And so what we are seeing is that when you involve municipalities, nonprofits, employers together in this co-design, there is better uptake. And so I'll mention in a minute one initiative that has emerged as a solution. It's called the Employer Navigator, which is helping employers in these communities navigate the often complicated policy environment, learning about subsidies and opportunities that can help them tap into the immigrant talent pool. almost wrapping up, but I also wanted to say a word about policy and collaborative solutions, because in advancing economic inclusion for newcomers, government, of course, is a key partner. Particularly in this moment of economic crisis or economic uncertainty here in Canada, we do believe there is a real opportunity. This has been mentioned a few times throughout the P2P conference. It seems that there is increased political will to streamline credentialing processes. We need to ensure that talent within Canada is not wasted and that labor mobility across Canada is easier. Um, this has to be done in partnership not only with the federal government, but with provincial governments and regulatory bodies from across the country. We do feel there is momentum building. We do know that it's an economic imperative and also a human one, enabling not only Canadians, but also newcomers to easily move and work whatever they choose to do so. Data sharing is also critical. One of the issues that we are encountering, and as researchers, I'm sure that Tony and Wendy appreciate this point as well, is that we do need to have better data sharing across sectors. We need to track progress on mobility, on retention, on advancement, not just hiring numbers. We place an emphasis with the employers that we partner with on understanding not only the mechanisms they use to understand how many newcomers they're hiring, but how are they advancing within their organizations. Very important as well is to center equity around innovation. This was also mentioned in the panel this morning. If you were able to tune in, we need to ensure that legislation, policies, and tools, particularly around AI regulation, are centering inclusion and equity at the core of what is being developed. And finally, something that I know Wendy mentioned as well, we need to focus on outcomes. We need to working at the systems level, working in a shrinking funding environment. We need to emphasize that our programs and interventions need to be outcomes based, and so we need to place a strong emphasis on evaluation and assessing the impact that our work is having. Finally, I'll just share that as we think about next steps, closing with some key high-level insights from some national roundtables that WES hosted earlier this year, with key stakeholders from government, business community, civil society, to help us understand how should we be wrestling with our most pressing immigration issues. Out of these, there is a full report. You can find it on the WES website. There was not agreement on everything, but we found remarkable alignment on 3 principles that can guide the way forward. The first one that came out very loud and clear is that immigration is a nation-building strategy. It's not separate from housing, healthcare, education, or labor policy. It is deeply connected to all of them and must be part of how we plan for Canada's future. The second thing is that we must refocus on permanent residency. Having stable, predictable pathways that allow people to put down roots, strengthen communities, and rebuild public trust. And the third one is that we must unlock immigrant talent. In this day and age, it's not acceptable that 1 in 3 immigrants in Canada are working in jobs that don't take any of their skills, training, or expertise into consideration. We need faster and further credential recognition and also better bridging programs and inclusive hiring practices by employers so that newcomers can contribute at their full capacity. So I'll leave it there, but happy to also now enter the conversation and answer any questions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Daniel, for speaking to Canada's untapped talent and how to address barriers to advance newcomer inclusion. At this point, I'd like to welcome all of our speakers to turn on their cameras so that we can turn over to the Q&A portion. I have some pointed questions that I'll ask while some of the Q&A comes in through the chat, while also noting that there is 15 minutes left in the session. Perhaps I'll point the first question over to you, Wendy, building off what Daniel just mentioned around, tapping into the skills side of things. So my first question to you is, the data suggests risks and opportunities tied to AI for immigrant workers, or there is. How can policy and training programs ensure that AI adoption reduces rather than widens inequities for newcomers?
Good question. I think one of the first issues is obviously understanding the guidelines for responsible AI use, whether it's in HR hiring practices. This is something we've looked at carefully, whether it's in, frankly, government processes, because there is a real risk that historic bias will be reinforced in the new systems that are developed. And we know that existing systems are fraught in terms of bias against people who are racialized, bias against people from certain countries, bias against people for whom English is a second language, and. So we have to, I'm a big proponent of the potential of artificial intelligence, but I think right up front, we need to understand what the limitations are and how we have to ensure that we have inclusive design for AI systems. The second thing is I think we have to get real about the extent of the disruption that AI is going to produce. I was on a panel recently with people in career development, and they were talking about how the government should give them more money and the government should reduce their workload and. Well, we know that the better educated the immigrants, the less likely they are to use services, which is part of the reason why Tony's research, they don't know about how the services are working or not working. And there are massive opportunities to improve the quality of services delivered to newcomers. And post-secondary institutions, I'm the first to admit, are the worst in terms of embracing innovation. We like to talk about it, but we don't do it. So I think that's kind of job two, is making sure that we're practicing what we preach, that we're using AI to do more with less. The goal of the sector is not to create jobs for people who work in the sector. The goal of the sector has to be to provide the best possible service and outcomes for newcomers. And then the third thing from my perspective is recognizing that the skills profiles are changing very, very rapidly, and we can't plan when we can't predict. So, I'm a big believer in the Skills for Success framework, but I think we have to recognize that AI literacy is now foundational. We need deep AI skills, but we also need a middle layer of people who know how to use AI to advance organizational goals and objectives. A lot of newcomers are advanced in terms of their use of AI, but maybe not their understanding of how to apply it in certain organizational contexts within the new environments they're working in. And we've done research on, for example, the potential of AI to improve language training, the potential of AI to improve job counseling, the potential, like they have avatars now for training doctors. Do we not think that we can have AI agents that can serve way more people way more quickly than individuals who lack breadth and experience? So I think we have to get real around the threat of disruption, the opportunities, but also we can't sit around and wait for the future to happen. We've got to get ready now.
Great. Thank you, Wendy. And maybe building on that in the theme of AI, I'll turn this next question over to you, Tony, where beyond helping immigrants adapt to the current market, how can we strategically position newcomer talent to be a key advantage for Canada in the global AI and digital economy?
Yeah, that's great. I agree with both Wendy and Danielle. We are an immigration country, right? Immigration is a nation building exercises, right? For their social economic contribution and so on. And we are actually quite advancing in terms of AI research and development. We have Nobel Prize winner at U of T, Professor Hinton, but we are a little bit behind in terms of the adoption, as I show the data, and also commercialization of AI to actually fill this innovation productivity gap we've been talking for decades, right? And so I think we need to definitely capitalize our immigration system. That's when I applaud the federal government, putting significant investment in attracting internationally qualified researchers. I would say, we do need a lot of philosophers and historians, no doubt about that. But, in terms of field labor, the innovation and productivity gap, we probably need to prioritize a little bit on AI and other advanced digital technologies, maybe STEM fields and so on. So this is the first one. We probably need to develop even special category on global AI talent visa. Okay, right? Just so that we can actually fill the gap and in the high skilled categories. And also we need to streamline this visa process, right? As you know, we have quite significant cut back in terms of public service, including ICC, which might actually slow down. Hopefully, the AI will pick up a little bit, improving efficiency. But I think the preliminary test said this is not actually kind of panacea to solve all the problems. So we definitely need to kind of again privatize those kind of highly skilled category, which I think the government knows put it on economic class and also the high skill class, and to reduce the processing time and make sure they can hit the ground running, and also the pre-arrival settlement integration. I think is also crucial, and it's based on concrete evidence. And we also need, I agree with Wendy and also Danny as well, we need to share information. We need to share infrastructure. We need to share network, professional networks, right? In developing AI innovation and the adoption as well. Because especially for smaller province, smaller region, and rural remote community, they don't have the resources, right, to jumpstart. But a lot of information, a lot of resources, a lot of infrastructure, technology can be shared, right? Especially I'm speaking from Atlantic Canada, Newfoundland and Labrador. In many rural remote areas, we even don't have internet access, right? And speaking of AI, right, which is very challenging. And so, no, I think, we really need to kind of bring immigrants into part of solution, not a part of problem. I know in tough economic time, a lot of immigrants often was, treated as scapegoats, right? We have those kind of infrastructure, crisis. We have this housing crisis. We have this healthcare crisis. We have the crisis for many, many decades. Not because the immigrants we recently, attract to, right? This 300, 400,000 won't actually have that dramatic effects. And I think when you have paper with Morley Gunderson about the impact of immigration on the housing market, right? And certainly there's no evidence whatsoever to show that's the case. And actually, many immigrants are highly skilled, right? They can actually address those challenges we're talking about in healthcare, in housing, in education sector, and so on, in high tech. And so essentially what we need to do is that, to put in the concerted efforts, right, from the settlement agencies, from all level governments, from the employee associations, so we recognize, right, important value of high skill immigration, and you show the data early on. Immigration contributed 100% workforce growth, right, and especially highly skilled workforce, and especially in the AI and other advanced digital technology areas. And this is our strengths, and we need to capitalize by using those important initiatives, and Wendy talked about, and Danielle talked about, right? And to fast track credential recognition. I think the federal budget also put in some money into that. That's great. And improving the professional networks for skilled immigrants. And also remove the barriers talking about, right? The labor market discrimination we're talking about, the efficient job matching systems, lack of support for immigrant entrepreneur, and so on and so forth. So I think, I'm still optimistic, right? And Canada is still, I think, according to OECD, has the most effective system for immigrant settlement integration. And also many potential immigrants want to come. I think this recent data shows that 80 million people, right, worldwide still want to migrate to Canada. We have a large labor pool to draw on the best and brightest in the STEM fields, in the AI and other advanced digital technology fields. So from that, I'm still hopeful. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. And I know we have a couple of questions for Daniel before he must pop off. So I just want to thank you for taking the time here. Daniel, I just want to ask you one question before you need to leave. So what are the most pressing challenges employers face in hiring and retaining immigrant talent? And how do these challenges intersect with issues like credential recognition and workplace integration?
I feel like we will need a whole session for that one. I'll just maybe highlight two or three things. The first thing that comes to mind, and it's also connected to some of the conversations around AI and use of AI in HR processes. I was presenting at another panel earlier. I'm lucky to be in person here in Halifax, and an employer approached us to have a conversation about some of the challenges they're facing in actually getting through to the right type of immigrants that could be filling the pressing labor gaps that they have in their facilities and in their organization. And so they suspect that they apply, but they don't make it through. And so they were looking at so to me that's like the big, we know that there is a disconnect between talent and supply and demand. But the fact that this is being exacerbated at this pace by the adoption of AI and the algorithms are filtering out people that do not have Canadian experience and that do not possess the type of resume that AI will actually make like shortlists so that the hiring managers can review is really troublesome. And so there has to be oversight. In some states in the US, they're looking at a third-party verification and assessment of algorithms used by HR firms or by companies to ensure that they're compliant and that they're centered on equity and inclusion. There has to be something that at the government level to support that process. The other thing I would say, I talked about skills assessments and how do we need to streamline credentialing. This is something that employers also, again, this particular employer, they happen to operate in 3 provinces, and for each province, they have to undertake a different process to hire, and they cannot have mobility within their own workforce, which is like bankers. So we do need to come together as a nation and fix this issue of labor mobility. And the third thing that I would say, we alluded throughout the presentation as well, is that, as you know, Canada's employers are largely SMEs, like in the range of like 90%. And country is also a country of regions. And so when you design immigration policy and you set up targets and who's coming and not coming into the country, you need to take into account that the reality is very different in communities like Regina, where the unemployment rate is like almost at full employment, versus Toronto, where you have like a 7%. And employers are saying also, small and medium employers are continue to have and to struggle to find the right talent in some of the rural and more remote communities. And so providing solutions that are tailored to the needs of specific communities from a policy perspective is also critical.
Great. Well, thank you so much. We have 1 more minute. I think we can sneak in 1 more question before we log off in terms of answering some of the questions that came in. So, Tony, you mentioned newcomers being highly skilled. Daniel, you mentioned credential recognition. So, Wendy, your data shows employers' attitudes strongly shape their willingness to hire immigrants. So what are the most effective approaches for shifting employer behavior and reducing bias in hiring? Oh, yeah.
Good question. I think in some communities, as Daniel said, it's very regional. So in some communities, they're desperate for skills. They would hire anybody from anywhere as long as they have the skills requirements. And, there was a question in chat about credentials versus competencies. And as much as I think credential recognition is important in certain regulated professions, I would argue that increasingly competencies are what's important. And we hear that from, the trade unions where they say, I don't care what the paper says. And increasingly, the reliability of the paper is a question. I'm going to give him a hammer and a saw and some nails and a piece of lumber and see what he can do, or she. So I think increasingly there is a focus on competencies as opposed to credentials. And I think that's the way to go when you're looking at employers. As you know, Caitlin, we do a lot of work with employers around creating more inclusive workplaces. But as Tony said, employers' attitudes are shaped by the bigger societal arguments. And I think we have to link arms and fight the anti-immigrant discourse that is corrosive and frankly wrong.
Yeah, I agree with Wendy, the assessment that we certainly need to do more those kind of anti-discriminating, anti-racism campaign at the federal, provincial, municipal level. But in the same time, we also need to do more cross-cultural communication training. And we know from our survey, right, a majority of the firms that reported positive hiring experiences and attitudes, and only if they have tried. Right. So that's the issue, the exposure question, right? Small rural areas, and, many employees haven't seen a foreigner in lifetime. They always, consider immigrants, as a little bit of kind of sense of uncertainty, even feel, and so on. So I think, those kind of support, especially to SMEs, have them tried. Maybe, some kind of government supported internship, apprenticeship program. We know those are proven strategies for high-paying job down the road. And this is crucial for immigrants because they are kind of caught in this kind of dilemma, right? They need Canadian experience, Canadian education to get a job, right? But without being hired, they don't have the experience to begin with, right? So this is always the issue. We need to get a foot in the door. I think it's so crucial. And so from that perspective, I think, the initiative, Danielle talked about, right? How to fast track the credential recognition, how to actually sometimes it's legal. Mandate, for example, in Ontario, they passed legislation. You prohibit requiring Canadian experience. It's illegal, right? So this kind of policy practice is really, I think, is important. And on the top of this kind of, you need to rise higher from the employee perspective, right? Not just meeting the minimum, equity requirement, but also you want to have the high-end diversity management policy and practice that Wendy and DI has been promoting.
Yeah. I'll just add, I mean, I cannot agree with everything that was said. I would say just two things. At the macro level, indeed, we need to continue to anchor the conversation on nation building, immigration as nation building. When it comes to employers, and this is something that all of us here in this conference, as we interact with employers, is to anchor the conversation on talent. This is not only or if about DEI, which is very important, but it's really about meeting talent needs. And when I mentioned the demographic number, I always like to start with that figure because the question is not if employers will have to hire immigrants, is when. And so the sooner they get ready to do so and to be able to tap into that talent pool, the better for them.
Great. Well, thank you so much for coming in and presenting as part of today's session on immigrant workforce integration, including upskilling and reskilling for employment and entrepreneurship. Thank you to Wendy, Tony, and Daniel for being part of this session, and thank you to Pathways to Prosperity for hosting the conference. With that, I'd like to say thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hope to see you in person.